Level 1. The liability. Some players make their teams worse by wearing the armband. Not because they are bad footballers, but because something in their character, given the authority of the captaincy, became a problem the team couldn't afford. William Gallas is the more theatrical case. February 2008. Arsenal are leading the Premier League title race, 2-1 up against Birmingham City in injury time, when Gaël Clichy concedes a penalty. Gallas, the captain, does not organise the defence or speak to his goalkeeper. He kicks the advertising hoardings in fury, then walks to the halfway line to watch as the penalty is taken. Birmingham score. At full-time, Gallas sits down in the centre circle and refuses to leave the pitch. Arsène Wenger, the manager, has to walk onto the pitch and collect him. In the dressing room, Gallas gets into a physical confrontation with Gilberto Silva. The following season, he gives an interview to the press, criticising his younger teammates for lacking courage. Jens Lehmann, his own goalkeeper, wrote that players had shaken their heads when Wenger made Gallas captain in the first place. He was stripped of the armband and replaced by a 21-year-old Spaniard. Arsenal finished third. Manchester United won the title. Christian Romero is one of the best centre-backs in the Premier League. He is also the most frequently sent-off player in English football since joining Spurs in 2021. 6 red cards across all competitions, more than anyone else in that period. In February 2026, as captain, he was dismissed inside the first half hour at Old Trafford, leaving his team with 10 men for over an hour. They lost 2-0. He apologised to his teammates in the dressing room. The pundits were direct. As a captain, you are supposed to lead by example. He let his team down again. The aggression that makes Romero great as a defender is the same quality that keeps costing his team games. The armband didn't create that problem. It just made it everyone else's. Level 2. The stable ones. This level is about a specific kind of leadership that football chronically undervalues. The captain who shows up every week, sets a consistent standard, and whose real value only becomes visible when they leave. Gary Neville became Manchester United's captain in November 2005. He had spent a decade alongside captain Roy Keane and was honest in his autobiography about what that meant. Keane had set the terms, and the dressing room changed when he went. Neville knew exactly what he was and didn't pretend otherwise. He brought discipline, knowledge, and total commitment. In January 2006, 2 months into Neville's captaincy, Rio Ferdinand headed in a 90-minute winner against Liverpool. Neville sprinted from the halfway line to the away end, kissed the badge in the faces of supporters who had been abusing him all afternoon, and was fined £5,000 by the FA. He has never regretted it. 3 league titles as captain. The armband fit him well, just differently to what came before. Koke at Atletico Madrid is what this level looks like at its cleanest. Over 700 appearances, the all-time club record. 7 seasons as captain, 1 red card in 17 years. Xavi called him his natural successor as Spain's midfield organizer. Simeone never wavered. 2 La Liga titles, 2 Europa Leagues, a Champions League final as captain. No incidents, no controversy. Leadership so consistent and solid, it becomes structural. You only notice it when someone asks who the captain is, and you realize you never once had to wonder. Raúl wore the Real Madrid armband for 7 seasons. 741 appearances in total, without a significant disciplinary incident or public controversy. Jorge Valdano described him plainly. If you wrote a list of Raúl's qualities, it would be a list of the values of Real Madrid. Utter professionalism. Every single day of his life. Alex Ferguson, who faced him as an opponent across some of the most intense Champions League nights of the era, said simply, "Real buy these big players like Figo, Zidane and Ronaldo, but I think the best player in the world is Raul. The knock on Raul as a captain is that his 7 years coincided with Madrid's longest European drought. The counter is that no player in the club's history better embodied what it was supposed to mean to be there. Level 3. The young captain. The difficulty here is not talent. It is leading a dressing room of players who are older, more experienced, and more established, before that room has decided whether you deserve it. Fernando Torres became Atletico Madrid's youngest ever captain at 19, in a squad that included Diego Simeone, the man who would later manage him. Torres had dragged Atletico out of the Segunda División and into La Liga as a teenager, and the club gave him the armband before he was old enough to have any real authority over players who had been professionals since before he was in secondary school. He wore it for 4 years before leaving for Liverpool. When he departed, the words, "You'll never walk alone," were inscribed on his captain's armband as a farewell to the fans who had watched him grow up wearing it. Cesc Fabregas was named Arsenal captain in November 2008 at 21, succeeding the man who had sat in the centre circle and had to be physically collected by the manager. Wenger made no ceremony of it. He simply announced Fabregas and declined to explain the decision. The dressing room he inherited included Van Persie, Adebayor, Nasri, Clichy, established internationals, most of them older. Wenger said only that a captain is the voice of the club to the outside world and one of the leaders within it. He then handed that responsibility to a 21-year-old who had been at the club since he was 16, and the dressing room followed without any questions. Fabregas held the armband until he left for Barcelona in 2011. Matthijs de Ligt captained Ajax in the 2018-19 Champions League at 19 as the permanent club captain, leading a side through a knockout run that knocked out Real Madrid and Juventus and reached the semi-finals. In the quarter-finals second leg against Juventus, with Ajax needing to overturn a first-leg deficit, de Ligt scored the header that put them through. A teenager, wearing the armband, in the biggest game his club had played in a generation, delivering the decisive moment. The following summer, he joined Juventus for €75 million. Part of that fee was for the player, part of it was for the leadership. Level 4. Leading by performance. Some players don't lead in the traditional sense. No speeches, no tactical organization on set pieces, no arm around the shoulder. They lead by making it functionally impossible for anyone around them to justify lower standards. Cristiano Ronaldo has captained Portugal since 2008 and worn the armband sporadically at club level across his career. But the armband was almost beside the point. Every significant teammate he has had at every club has said the same thing independently. His training habits raised the bar for everyone else. Not through instruction, through demonstration. He is the player other players watch to calibrate what is acceptable. When his country or his team needed a goal in a knockout game, a World Cup, a Euros, a Champions League night, he produced it with a frequency that eventually stopped being surprising and started being expected. That expectation, that certainty that he would find a way, is what made him a captain whether or not he was wearing the armband. Lionel Messi operated through a quieter mechanism. For years at Barcelona, his leadership was almost entirely his performances on the pitch. Then came Copa America 2021 and the World Cup 2022, a player who rarely said anything in public, dragging a national team to back-to-back tournament wins it had no structural right to claim. Both Ronaldo and Messi sit here rather than higher, not because their leadership is lesser, it is extraordinary, but because what sits above them requires the full range. Communication, sacrifice, crisis management, the ability to carry a dressing room through the worst possible moments. They lead through one channel at a level nobody in the history of football has reached. Level 5. The Warrior. Roy Keane. 13 red cards in his career. The tackle on Haaland. Premeditated, admitted in his own autobiography. Saipan walked out on his country at a World Cup. All of it real. Turin 1999 is also real. United 2-0 down against Juventus. Keane booked, knowing he would miss the final if they got there. Ferguson wrote it best. Pounding over every blade of grass, competing as if he would rather die of exhaustion than lose. Paul Scholes said, "He was our manager on the pitch." The volatility and the leadership lived in the same person for the same reason. At level 5, the volatility occasionally won. Patrick Vieira. 8 red cards in the Premier League. Sent off twice in back-to-back games to open the 2001 season. Fined a record £45,000 for spitting at a West Ham player in 1999. Same physical force, same liability card as Keane, at the same time, on the same stage. The tunnel confrontation between the two of them before Arsenal versus Manchester United in 2005 is the defining image of both. Two captains, squaring up before a ball had been kicked, neither willing to yield an inch. Same combustion, same level. Both of them balancing the intensity on a knife's edge. Robbie Savage. Most yellow cards in Premier League history at the time. Captained 4 clubs. Released by Manchester United as a youth player before rebuilding his career from Crewe upward. A detail that tells you everything about how he operated. He was never the most gifted player on the pitch. He was the most relentless, all action, high energy, the kind of midfielder opposition fans loathed and his own dressing room trusted. The most famous Savage story. He knocked on Ferguson's door at Old Trafford after a match to ask if he could have Beckham's shirt. Ferguson opened the door, said no, and closed it again. 3 other managers gave Savage the armband, regardless of what Ferguson thought of him. The intensity that produced all those cards produced the leadership too. Opponents felt one side of it, teammates felt the other. All 3 players whose leadership ran through what they provided physically and mentally, and through the fear factor they brought. Opponents never quite knew if they were going to get the ball or something else entirely. Teams follow captains like this not because they are asked to, but because watching them makes giving anything less impossible to justify. Level 6. The demanding standard. What separates this level from level 5 is that here the edge is pointed in the right direction. Every player on this level has something combustible in them. The difference is, it never costs the team. Steven Gerrard. Liverpool were 3-0 down at half-time in the 2005 Champions League final against the best club side in Europe. Gerrard played the pass that started the comeback, headed in himself, then won the penalty that made it 3-3. What is often understated about Istanbul is not just the moment, but the man in the moment. 24 years old, roughly 2 years into the captaincy, carrying the emotional weight of a club that had not won a European Cup in 20 years. And he responded to the worst 45 minutes of his professional life by dragging the situation back from the edge personally. It was not one contribution, it was the pass, the header, the penalty won, the belief transmitted across the pitch that this was not finished. That is what captaincy looks like when it is most needed. Bruno Fernandes. The gestures visible from the stands, the moments where he is too hard on a teammate, all real. Also real, first to sprint when a defender loses the ball, constantly pointing to runs before the pass is played, the player whose standards force everyone around him to match them or look like they are not trying. Mourinho said Fernandes was the only United player who arrived with the right mentality every week without exception. Šeško spoke publicly about Fernandes directing him through matches in real time from his very first game. The demands and the leadership are the same quality expressed differently depending on the moment. A leader that refuses to change, guiding teammates and running more than all of them. Virgil van Dijk became Liverpool's captain and built the club's defensive culture through the standards he demanded of himself and everyone around him in training and in matches. In October 2020, he tore his ACL and missed most of a season. What Liverpool lost was not just a defender, it was the reference point the entire backline had been measuring itself against. Without him, the defensive structure that had conceded 33 goals in the title-winning season leaked 42. 6 consecutive home defeats. A side that had looked impenetrable looked ordinary. When he came back, that standard came back with him. Thiago Silva. Tuberculosis at 21 told he might never play again. He recovered and went on to captain AC Milan, the first foreigner to hold that armband in 50 years. Then PSG for 8 seasons, winning 7 League One titles and captaining them to their first Champions League final. He captained Brazil at a home World Cup, suspended for the semi-final itself, watching from the stands as his country lost 7-1 without him. Then Chelsea at 36 on a free transfer, Champions League in his first season. Not as official club captain, but as the presence in the dressing room everyone deferred to regardless of who wore the armband. Pochettino put it plainly, "You don't need the armband to be a captain. He is a captain." 5 countries, 4 elite clubs across 2 decades, the same composure and the same standards at every stop. Level 7. The complete. Every level below this has a condition. The warrior needs to be lucky with the referee. The young captain needs the right dressing room. The players at level 7 don't need conditions. They define what captaincy looks like, and the standard doesn't move. Paolo Maldini. 902 appearances for AC Milan across 25 seasons. 7 Serie A titles. 5 Champions Leagues. Captain from 1997 until retirement at 41. Across 647 Serie A appearances, he was never sent off, not once, in 3 decades of professional football. He described his philosophy simply. If he had to make a tackle, he had already made a mistake. He preferred to read the game. His father, Cesare, had captained Milan to the European Cup in 1963. Paolo lifted the same trophy as captain in 2003, exactly 40 years later, at the same ground. Gattuso, who played alongside him for years, said, "He doesn't talk that much. It might just be 4 words in an entire season, but those 4 words shake you up." Iker Casillas. Joined Real Madrid's academy at 9, made his senior debut at 18, led Spain to 3 consecutive international titles: Euro 2008, World Cup 2010, Euro 2012. The first country ever to win 3 major tournaments in succession. Only the 3rd captain in football history to lift the World Cup, the Champions League, and the European Championship, after Beckenbauer and Deschamps. His career ended on the training pitch in 2019 when he suffered a heart attack. He was 38. He never played again. Franz Beckenbauer, der Kaiser. Captain of West Germany through the 1972 European Championship and the 1974 World Cup, both won. Captain of Bayern Munich through 3 consecutive European Cups, 1974 to 1976. Then managed West Germany to the 1990 World Cup. Played 424 Bundesliga games and was never once sent off. 2 Ballon d'Or awards as a defender. The first captain to lift the current World Cup trophy in 1974, and the only man to do so again as a manager 16 years later. The nickname Der Kaiser was not handed to him by a federation or a club. It was given to him by supporters watching him play, because it was the only word that seemed adequate. Javier Zanetti, Inter Milan captain from 1999 until retirement in 2014. 15 years. He played under 19 different managers, and not one of them moved him from the captaincy, through formation changes, ownership crises, and complete rebuilds. Over 800 appearances, the all-time record for a non-Italian at an Italian club. 5 consecutive Serie A titles. The 2010 Champions League under Mourinho, when Zanetti was 36. What his career represents is not a famous moment or a famous speech. It is 15 years of never giving any of those 19 managers a reason to think about changing anything. Francesco Totti captained Roma from 1998 until retirement in 2017. 19 years. One club, one city, one armband. In 2004, a move to Real Madrid was effectively arranged. The paperwork was being prepared. He turned it down. He turned down money, trophies, and a squad containing Zidane and Ronaldo Nazario, because leaving Roma was something he could not bring himself to do. In March 2016, he came on as a substitute at the Bernabeu in the Champions League, at 39 years old, with Roma already losing the tie. The stadium rose as one to give him a standing ovation. Marcelo and Casemiro walked over personally to shake his hand as he came onto the pitch. Sergio Ramos swapped shirts with him at the end and said he had admired him since he was a child. That is what 19 years of loyalty to one club earns you, the respect of the greatest stadium in the world for the man who chose not to play in it. 1 Serie A title and 2 Coppa Italias. Modest for someone of his ability, entirely by choice. His last words on the pitch at Roma: "You are and will always be my life." Carles Puyol captained Barcelona for 10 years and lifted 21 trophies. He was never the most technically gifted player in his own defense. He captained it for a decade regardless, through 3 Champions Leagues and 6 La Ligas. In the 2011 final at Wembley, Eric Abidal had just returned to the game after a liver transplant. When Barcelona won, Puyol called Abidal forward and stepped aside so he could lift the cup first. No prior arrangement, just the decision, made instantly. Guardiola said, "You helped us so much, not just in words, but in actions, every day, in every training session." Xavi said Puyol was the best professional he had ever shared a dressing room with. That is the sentence that matters most about Puyol. Not the trophies, not the tackles, the best professional. In a dressing room that contained himself, Messi and Iniesta, the person Xavi chose to describe that way was the one who captained them. 7 levels. From the captain who sat in the center circle and had to be retrieved by his manager, to the 6 who carried the armband across lifetimes of football without ever letting anyone down. The comment section will have views on the placements. That is exactly what it is there for. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.